Just give a couple seconds for people to start filing in. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Wednesday Wise webinar. My name is Sydney Konahia, and I am with the International Franchise Association, and we have a great 60 minutes lined up for you all today. Before we jump into things, I just want to touch base on two things. Today's webinar will be recorded, and a link to the recording along with the slide deck will be emailed out to all registrants post-webinar. And if you do have any questions for today's speakers, please feel free to add those in the chat or questions box, and they will address them towards the end of the session. Today's topic is franchise marketing ownership, defining corporate versus franchisee roles in strategy, execution, and accountability, and it's brought to us by Location3. Here to provide today's discussion from Location3 are Josh Allen, Vice President of Marketing and Sales, and Crystal Ware, Chief Strategy Officer. And joining Josh and Crystal are Genevieve Weeks, Founder and CEO of Tutu School, and Brian Loeb, President and CEO of BML Public Relations. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you again to Location3 for sponsoring today's Wednesday Wise webinar. I will now pass things off to you guys to get us started.
Excellent. Thank you, Sydney. Thanks to everyone out there joining us today. And thanks, as always, to the IFA as well. We hope everyone had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend, and we're excited to kick off the discussion here today. As Sydney said, franchise marketing ownership. Our goal is to have a lively discussion around roles in strategy, execution, and accountability. We've got some great guest panelists, as Sydney shared here. Before we get started, from a little housekeeping perspective, for those of you that are not familiar with Location3, we are the premier partner driving digital transformation for franchise systems. What does this mean exactly? Well, it means that Location3 truly is a catalyst for revenue growth, helping franchisors like you and the franchisees in your community solve tomorrow's business challenges to ultimately drive the growth that you seek for your brand and your businesses. We've got demonstrated expertise in everything from data analytics to digital media and advertising, artificial intelligence and digital technology, performance marketing, franchisee activation, all of which ultimately empowers our partners to thrive and grow in this digital landscape. We've been around since 1999 with more than 2 decades of proven experience in franchising. How do we do this? Well, our core areas of focus are really digital strategy, customer acquisition, and revenue growth. Depending on your business challenges and goals, this can take shape really in a variety of strategic and tactical ways, from national, regional, and local marketing integration, hands-on digital media planning and buying. I mentioned data analytics, but also predictive forecasting, customer journey mapping, SEO, content marketing, listings and data management. If it's digital, we do it, and we do it specifically in franchising. But ultimately, what sets us apart from everyone else are 3 key things. First and foremost, performance. I always like to say, for those that know me, your success and the success of our partners is our success. We stand by our track record of performance and delivering the growth that our partners seek. Second, powered by technology. As I mentioned previously, we leverage innovative cutting-edge tools and technology to optimize performance and ultimately drive efficiency in marketing and alignment across teams. And last but not least, technology for any franchise system cannot do it alone. It takes a really dedicated, experienced team, and our experts at Location3 are the ones that truly make the magic happen behind the scenes. Speaking of technology, what also makes this a little bit different is that we bring that 25 years of performance digital marketing expertise together with Local Act, the premier local marketing platform for businesses. Ultimately, we created Local Act to empower franchise owners with digital technology that delivers growth in leads, customers, sales, and revenue. We've been members of the IFA for more than 17 years. We're incredibly proud of our partnership with the IFA, but also with many industry leaders like Google, Meta, Microsoft, Apple, and others in the digital ad tech landscape. And at the end of the day, our focus is truly clear: to deliver results for our partners in franchising and drive growth for their businesses. If you'd like to find us on the road, we'll be in Atlanta next month at the Franchise Customer Experience Conference. And then we'll also be here in our own backyard of Denver, Colorado, one of my favorite events at the beautiful Botanic Gardens, the Global Franchise Summer Summit. So if you're going to be there, please find us, say hello. We'd love to speak with you. But let's get to today's topic. In order to frame this up, we find this is one that is often hotly debated on social channels like LinkedIn, in boardrooms, at the business unit level among franchisees. Who is responsible for strategy, execution, and ultimately accountability of franchise marketing performance? Before we touch on our speakers, I think it's important to take a step back and look at the customer journey. This is one of my favorite representations of the ever-evolving, complex customer journey. And when we talk about the discussion today, well, it's critical to not only align marketing strategies and tactics to meet your customers where they are and engage them in an effective way, whether that's from brand inspiration all the way to in-store visits and purchases, it's also just as critical to ensure alignment among your organization regarding the roles and responsibilities that franchisors and franchisees and suppliers play in doing just that. I have the privilege to introduce today's guest panelists as we dive headfirst into this very topic so that they can actually share their insights and experiences around how franchisors, franchisees, and suppliers can ultimately create this alignment that we're all seeking in marketing and frankly operations to drive better ROI for all of our businesses at the end of the day. So I will take a brief moment to pause, and I'd love to have each of them introduce themselves and share a little bit about their organizations, starting first with Genevieve Weeks. Genevieve, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me, Josh, and thanks to IFA for hosting this. I'm Genevieve Weeks. I'm the founder and CEO of Tutu School. Tutu School is a collection of boutique ballet schools for very young children. So we start as young as 6 months, which, yes, we have baby classes. They're not doing true ballet, but we do start getting them in there for exposure to music and movement and caregiver bonding even at that very young age. And then we just go up to 8 years old. So a very narrow hyper focus. And our brand is 17 years old, but we have been franchising for just over a decade. We have locations all across the country and a couple of international locations as well. We're currently at 137 locations and growing.
Thank you. Brian, go ahead.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me, and thanks also to IFA. I'm Brian Lowe. I'm the founder of BML Public Relations. We're an award-winning PR agency. We specialize in earned and paid media campaigns for franchisors and multi-unit franchisees. We represent everyone from the world's largest franchise operator and Flynn Group to emerging concepts and sort of everything in between. We recently launched something called Unveil by BML, which is a 3-month strategic grand opening PR package, and it's designed to really generate maximum local market buzz through a mix of earned, paid, and digital. And it's engineered to really just blitz the local market, increase brand awareness, drive traffic, and cultivate that consumer loyalty, and do that from day one, which is the most important. Fully scalable, starting at $3,000 per location, depending on how many units you have, but it's the only package of its kind in franchising or the industry, PR industry for that matter. So, so we talk about the ownership of certain things. Grand opening is one of them. So who's going to own the grand openings? Who should own the grand openings? We'll tell you shortly.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. And last but certainly not least, my colleague at Location3, Crystal Ware. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Crystal Ware. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Location3. So I'm not going to tell you any more about us, but I've been on the franchising supplier side for 15 years now, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'm Josh Allen, Vice President of Marketing and Sales. I am the color commentator in the booth, as they say today. Let's get into this. One of the things I think when we talked about in our initial discussion prior to the webinar was really around the beauty of franchising and creating systems, processes for virtually everything to help entrepreneurs and business owners scale a business in many ways much more efficiently and faster, if you will, in some respects, than starting a business themselves. It's the beauty of franchising. One of the things that often, depending on the system that you're in, feels like it's, kind of at the end of the list is marketing. We help you get the system up and running. We help you, find your real estate. Maybe we run a grand opening campaign. We do all of these things to build the business out. And now marketing in some cases may be, at the ownership of the franchisee entirely. There may be some things that the franchisor is implemented, but can't necessarily use that dreaded word mandate that we hear in franchising. So to back that all up, I'm curious from a high level perspective from your experiences, and Genevieve, maybe we can start with you. kind of some of the lessons that you have learned in growing the Tutu brand along the way, then incorporate some of those processes, systems that are maybe more familiar to operations than they are to marketing, but what are the benefits that you've learned along the way that can be related to marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the key, or I would say sort of the core question at the heart of franchising, and sort of, something we're always revisiting is that relationship between franchisor and franchisee, in terms of, we really look for franchisees that are entrepreneurial, right? And really view this as their business. And because you're looking for owners that are going to have a clear sense of ownership over their business, that means they're going to have ideas about how they want to implement marketing at their location, how they're going to implement your marketing strategy. And yet we know a big part of what they're buying into is brand consistency, and is the strength of the brand that you've built. And so we have to fiercely protect that. And I think kind of toggling between what sometimes feel like, competing values there can be a real challenge, but I think it's an important needle to thread, and I think we can do it. Where we've really invested and are continuing to invest a lot of time is in building out a lot of tools, so that everything's explicit, right? So we're trying to make it as easy as possible for owners to follow our brand guidelines. We use Canva Teams for a ton of just really easy plug and play templates, so that they're not building things from scratch and doing things that are really off brand. We have brand guides that are incredibly explicit down to details, like, we want you to be using studio generated content. So what filters are you using on your smartphone to filter that studio generated content before it goes up on your social media? I mean, it really has to be that specific, as well as some of the guidance around brand voice and things that people are used to. So we do a lot of that, and then we're really trying to focus on the education piece, like explaining to them why it matters, that it's not us, use the word mandate. It's not us just trying to, throw all these guidelines down at them from up on high and say, you have to do this and you can't do that, but why it's such an important, piece of what they've bought into, to make sure that they're maintaining that brand consistency. And also why, when there are things that we feel strongly about and that we do say, no, this is a guideline, like, this is important to our marketing strategy, why that's really going to lead to more success for them and more growth. So I think it's something we're always revisiting, but I think we're trying to err on the side of education and lots of tools, so that if there is a place where we're saying, this is something we feel strongly about, we need you to follow this. This is going to be a system-wide thing. It doesn't feel so much like an edict and more like a strategy that they're a part of and a partner in.
And if I could just build on
Excellent.
that, I think, Genevieve, what you've done is built a successful brand, and it's a successful brand for a reason. And when owners come into that brand, helping them understand what has worked thus far and why those things in place are really what tees them up for success. I think helping folks understand that you are owner location number 140, which means you have 139 locations that you've learned from. And these are things that have maybe gone really well, maybe not gone so well, and you've learned from them. And that's what's informed operations, standards, marketing materials, collateral. We know these filters work for a reason. If you work in retail, we know what products sell because we have hundreds of locations that have been selling that. So use this information in a way that makes the most sense to get your business off the ground even faster than what the owners who came before you might have been able to do. I think it's also a matter of they're entrepreneurs, and we're asking them to do a million things, especially at the start of a business. And so the more we can templatize and give them the tool sets that you talked about, the more efficient and effective they're going to be, the less stressed they're going to be, and being able to execute those things. So what makes it unique is how they can put their own customization into it and make it feel like it's their business. So at Location3, we will do things like give them a set of creative options. Which one resonates most with your community? Those are the ones that we can run within your ad campaigns. But it gives them the templates and the tools within the brand guidelines, but it gives them the further customization to make it their own. And that's what seems to resonate too with a lot of owners.
It's such a good point, and because we work with L3, we've experienced that, right? Where like we'll partner with you and say, is this something that is important for brand consistency that has to be system wide? Or to your point, we'll often have owners that say, okay, we see that this is the suite of ads we're running with for these 2 months, but this one feels closer to our, what will resonate with our community. Can we focus on that? And then I think to your other point, then we also always want to have a lot of good data and transparency to be able to show them why, if we're going to say no, there's a good reason behind it. But I think you're so right that being able to offer some of those customizations within a broader framework that feels really consistent then does let them, really feel like they have ownership over their own strategy too.
Yeah, I mean, I listen from a PR standpoint, regardless of who owns what, right? Tactically, I think absolutely corporate and franchisee strategy alignment is key. So if you need everyone swimming in the same directions at all times, right? Everyone's got to have that very clear understanding of what the marketing communications vision is to ensure that consistency and the clarity. Because as Genevieve mentioned, right, you have somebody sort of veering off course. Those are things that consumers pick up on. Those things they can tell when there's a disjointed version of marketing, whether it's being communicated from a PR standpoint or whether it's on the social channels or on the website. So that consistency is just huge. So making sure, we all want to get locations up and running out of the gate, fast, quick, strong, all of that. But the reality is, like anything, you really need to take a step back. You really need to make sure you're taking the time to almost train them up front, right? Because a lot of these franchisees too, they're coming from different walks of lives, from life. They might not have, in different careers, they might not have that understanding. So even if you better to strengthen something maybe somebody already knows than sort of just assume that they understand it. So yeah, strategy alignment I think is key. And then as I think, Genevieve said as well, to me, I think another big thing is just, while discussing who owns what, it's about collaborating to win. So, corporate marketing teams, they typically have very seasoned marketers and access to toolkits and creative and all the bells and whistles and toys that, help them do such a great job in driving it, right? But at the end of the day, these franchisees live, work, and play in their communities. So making sure that, there's not just collaboration, but there's listening, right? There's listening at the corporate level as well, because these franchisees, like I said, they live, work, and play there. They're going to understand the nuances of their market in Maryland better than somebody sitting at a desk in Denver will. So I think that those two things are super important to be hand in hand.
And I all great points, and I think from a timing perspective, that kind of first, whether we're talking very tactically about grand openings or new franchisees, new entrepreneurs entering the system, I'm curious of your thoughts on kind of, there's a need from a brand and a franchisor perspective to ultimately have frameworks and models for scalable success, right? That comes with protecting the brand, as you said, Genevieve. It comes with tapping into that excitement at the grand opening point, Brian. I'm curious of your feedback around that kind of inflection point. They're entering the brand, they're entering the system. How do you balance that? And how do you balance kind of the different types of owners, the folks that are very hands-on or have a desire to be, or an experienced marketer, versus the folks that may not be so? How do you capture that excitement on both of those perspectives at such a critical point for their business and for the system as a whole?
I mean, so what I would say is, assuming that, their discovery days, and, a lot of times, when brands are doing discovery days, you can sort of start sensing a lot of that excitement and that enthusiasm and those skill sets, I think, from there. But unfortunately, sometimes it's also baptism by fire, right? Sometimes you might think somebody's a little bit of a maybe has a marketing bug, and maybe it's not as strong as you thought. But I think at the end of the day, I think establishing clear protocols, you got to establish clear and concise protocols. It's key. Franchisees are an extension of the corporate brand, and inconsistent messaging can dilute, identity and promotions and all those things. So I think clear protocols, at least on the PR side, we have very clear protocols with clients when it comes to media communications, because we want to make sure that we're staying close and living and communicating the brand's core values, the tone, the messaging, all of that. So I think it's really, especially in the beginning phases, right? It's hopefully you have the resources and the time and the effort and the energy to run close. with new franchisees, just to really, do a little bit extra hand holding and experience some things together, so that A, they're not feeling like they're sort of on an island, and B, you're not sitting at a desk going, what's going on over there, with them. So I think that establishing protocols is a good way. The last thing I'll say related to protocols too is, especially during times of crisis, right? So if you have an incident that could potentially blow up, and be it on social media or traditional media, or whatever it is, you really want to make sure that there are very clear guidelines of protocols to make sure that people aren't speaking to media when they shouldn't, that everyone's aligned on messaging and how a situation's being handled. So protocols at the end of the day. I mean, that's the best way to make sure you're being efficient, effective, and protecting the brand.
I think all of that. I think for us, it's interesting. I feel like we have a lot of success, and it's almost, seems to be built-in momentum in terms of when we're onboarding new franchisees and new owners. And I think because there can be, there's a lot of data we can show them around pre-sale and like, here's what you need to do to launch your location. And because they're new, they're bought into all of that. Like, yes, show me how to launch. Tell me, if you give them a suggested marketing budget, which we do, and we've also started including in our FDD, which would be a recommendation I would put out there for franchisors. They really take that to heart. And I think where we've found that we need to make sure that we're keeping up the momentum, and this is where, again, I think education comes into play, is after they settle in a little bit, they've had a successful launch, they've had a successful opening, they have an established location. And, for us, we find that, especially with the nature of our business, a lot of the marketing that happens will be very grassroots. It'll be very word of mouth. So once you've seeded that initial interest, there's a certain amount of that momentum that starts feeding itself. But if you aren't continuing to take care of it and to layer on top of that digital marketing, paid search and social, making sure that you have strategies still in place for that, you can hit some seasonal fluctuations, or even just sort of in the life cycle of your business as kids age out, where you realize, oh my goodness, we have to kind of go back to those things that we were doing in the beginning. And what we've really tried to work on is to make sure that franchisees and owners aren't surprised by that they're almost looking at having seasonal relaunches, that they're paying attention to the life cycle of their business. We're investing a lot of resources right now into really making sure we really understand that, so we can provide them good data around, is it year 7, versus 8 that you should really be preparing for almost a relaunch. And so, I think that that's such an important piece of it. We've really found for us, I think it's almost easier in some ways for launch and grand opening to make sure that they have that buy-in, but then making sure that they don't get complacent and then at some point say like, oh my gosh, why do things feel a little bit stalled? But more that they're really preparing for, at a pretty regular cadence, revisiting and making sure that they're keeping up on all of their other layers of marketing once they've launched. And one other thing I'll say that is something we have to factor in, we have a lot of multi-unit owners. And so that can be different too. I mean, their strategy is going to be different. There might be different locations that need more marketing attention than others, given where they are in their life cycle. And that can be something that's really important to coach owners through too, because you don't want them to just have their entire system on sort of a set it and forget it if there are some that need some more intention around their marketing strategy. And so we have to think especially about how we're talking to them, because even if there's also budget concerns too. They're seeing the total amount of dollars going out the door, even if it's across a bunch of locations, whereas somebody with a single unit, it can feel a little bit more manageable to them. They're not always thinking in terms of the unit economics around that. So we have to think about all of those things, where they are in the life cycle of their business, how many locations they have, and make sure that we're really continuing to educate them and support them so that they're not forgetting about all these really important drivers for their business.
And in simplified terms as well, I mean, listen, franchisees are partners, right? They're our business partners. They're not, so I don't mean to say like they're like employees, but it sort of is like training an employee, right? You really need to take the time to handhold and put in the work up front. And that's going to be a different amount of hours for every different franchise partner you have, right? And that's the tough part, is balancing how much time that to making sure that you're not just leaning into one over the others. But I think it's like anything. The more upfront you put, training and education you put into it, the better off everyone's going to be in the long run, running on their own or running alongside you. So I do think that investment of time up front is critical.
And I think I love that you use inflection point, Josh, because I think there's actually multiple of those. To Genevieve's point about a life cycle, you've got an emerging business. And that's almost the easiest. And I say easiest because that person is hungry. They're ready to put in the work. They're rolling up their sleeves. If you give them the playbook, you hold their hand and you educate them on why those things are important, they're ready to hit the ground. And the grassroots efforts can be so productive. And then this next inflection point is where they leave emerging and become like a growth, where they're just trying to hit either a sales number, a unit sales number. It could be a, seats filled in a classroom, whatever that might be. And then you hit an established business, and an established business, folks can start to say, well, I've got my customer base, and what more do I need to do? And that's when you need to start changing the conversation from filling seats, so to speak, to taking market share. You're in a market, you're in a niche territory, and you may feel like, where do I go from here? But there is always opportunity for growth within any market. If you look at the total opportunity, including all your competitors, people that kind of sit adjacent to you. Genevieve, you're in a unique situation where dance is one of many, many, many activities that a parent could choose from. So your pool of opportunity is substantial for an established business. And the plans that are needed to grow and fill a funnel are different than a strategy that's needed to take over market share or to grow market share within a territory. And so constantly helping a franchisee understand that to get from $0 to $100,000 is one thing. To get from 100K to 500 is completely different. To hit 1 million to 2 million, 2 million to 5 million, 5 million to 10 million are completely different experiences, and your playbook should reflect that. And those different playbooks can help keep the franchisees, kind of no matter where they are in their life cycle, engaged in the marketing activity.
I love it. That's great feedback. And I think it's a good segue when we start to think a little bit more tactically, right? Because I think that we've all had previous discussions and some clarity around here's really where the franchisor starts to take those playbooks, those processes. This is what works. This is what we've established to capture that enthusiasm and then follow it through that life cycle ongoing. So when we talk about brand identity seems self-evident, or national media buying and marketing, how do you balance kind of the tactical elements with what franchisees may have enthusiasm or appetite, or just, Brian, to your point, knowledge in the local markets of their local customer bases? I think one of the challenges that everybody on this webinar today probably faces in different aspects is bringing those things together. So I'd love to kind of talk a little more tactically and give some guidance that from learned experience, or how to institute things like playbooks from a tangible perspective, because I think a lot of brands and categories wrestle with these same challenges. So, Genevieve, I'm curious, you've scaled Tutu significantly. How have you seen that kind of, here's what works, here's what we've tested, here's what we've learned, and this is why we need to have kind of franchisor ownership with franchisee buy-in as a starting point, and then growing from there?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. I think it's interesting because I think that a part of this is about the life cycle of the franchisor, right? So it's interesting when I think back to like our initial owners, and it's not like it was the wild, wild west. Like we definitely always had guidelines, but we were much more open to run with this, experiment with this, and we learned a lot, and it was a big part of how we grew, and it's something we really celebrated. And I think it's been instrumental to our growth. I think it's important. I think especially in that initial phase of franchising, I would never tell somebody not to do that. And yet now where we are, what's interesting is we're hearing more from our owners, both the longtime ones and the newer ones. They want some more structure. Now they might say that, and then there are times where you say, okay, great, let's do it this way. And they're like, whoa, that's a little too much structure. So it's still a little bit of a balance, and there's a little bit of give and take there. But it was a real learning for me, in that I kind of always assumed like, oh, any time that we were going to say, hey, this is going to be how it's going to be now, that there would be some sort of pushback. And instead to really hear from them that it's like, no, we really, there are a lot of ways in which we do want you to ultimately make the decision, because then you can build out a lot more support around that. So one of the tools that we've used to implement a lot of these things, both in terms of building out our playbooks, and we already have some built out. We're in the process of building out some others. But another example would be we rolled out a total revamp of our website recently. Is that we're in the second year of having a franchise advisory council. So we took a while to decide to launch an FAC, but it's been a real tool for us to use in marketing, because before we take something out to the entire system, we can test it with them and we can get feedback, and sometimes we will do a very real test. We ran a lead ad pilot through L3 with our FAC last year because we wanted to see if that was something we should explore with the rest of the system before we invested the resources and training everybody in it. And that was a fantastic use of the FAC. This website launch has been, has really been guided by them, both again in terms of like really tactical support, getting in there and messing around with things, but also telling us what their needs were and what they wanted. And so we've been doing the same thing as we build out brand guides, marketing playbooks, is that we're able to use that FAC as a real resource, find out what the system wants, what it needs, and then get their feedback before we take something to a broader audience. And so that would be a real recommendation. I resisted doing it for a while because I didn't think we were big enough, but we have 137 locations, but we're still just over 50 ownership teams because so many of our owners have multiple locations. And so for a while, I was worried that an FAC, we were too small for an FAC, and that people would feel sort of more like, well, I'm not on there, and feel left out. And I was worried about it because culture is so important to us, but it's been such a great tool for us. And so I would definitely recommend that if you haven't done that yet, consider doing it, and then think really strategically about how you can use it for marketing specifically. And the last piece I'll say on that is make sure when you do that, our FAC is structured in such a way where, since we are a smaller system in terms of ownership teams, we only have 5 members, and we have seats that are defined by number of years in the system, number of locations. And so that we have so far, just even though it's new, in both cycles that we've had so far, we have a real diversity in terms of background, experience, time in the system, number of locations, region. And so when we do, for example, doing something like the lead ad pilot, we could feel like it was representative. We weren't just talking to people who'd been in the system for forever or people in this region. And so I think especially if you're gonna use it for marketing, it's really important to make sure that you set it up in such a way where you're gonna have a really representative slice.
And I think Genevieve just nailed it, right? It sounds like she's got it set up put a lot of thought into it to set it up in that way that it's also collaborative, right? We've actually seen some systems where sometimes the FAC turns into judge, jury, and executioner of creative marketing ideas. And what happens there is that, if you go too wide with it too, you've got too many cooks in the kitchen. And then the reality is you may have people without really marketing background killing great marketing ideas just because maybe operationally they don't have the bandwidth to execute. So I think that Genevieve sounds like she's got the playbook. So you should definitely hit her up and ask her how she did it a little bit deeper. But yeah, you just have to be careful of that balance, so that the sort of the tail's not wagging the dog in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
definitely.
Well, you bring an interesting point, right? Creative ideas can come from all sources, good, bad, or indifferent. Or the good ones, how do we create those feedback loops from the people, on the ground, engaging with customers at that ownership level in market? Because there's value in that, right? And how do we bring those back again and merging these together as best as possible to the benefit of the brand and the business? Brian, I know you work obviously more on the franchisee level in developing some of those creative ideas. I'm curious of some examples that have gone the other way where the brands have said, this is a home run, let's institute this, and then how do we scale it?
Right. So, all right. So I sort of, I refer to myself at times as a professional jackass. So I'm always about a great creative idea and coming up with things that are fun and resonate, and of course generate earned media coverage, which is the sweet spot of what we do. Look, the reality is that creative ideas can come from anywhere. Actually, we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of viral campaigns over time that just go like globally viral, which is great. And some of those ideas have come from probably, if you were sitting in those brainstorms, the worst ideas you've probably ever heard, although we have a rule that there's no such thing as a bad idea. And that's because of the fact that anything can come from it. So, I mean, again, back to the collaboration, making sure that maybe there are pulse points, to hear franchisees and maybe some of those ideas, because again, they're living the brand on a day-to-day basis, right? We're working on the brand, they're working in the brand. So making sure, we love, especially for the restaurant side, we love talking to heads of R&D and people who are corporate chefs and the like, who are super creative people on the creation side. And one of the first things I say is like, hey, what's the craziest thing you've ever wanted to make for your brand that you feel like if you brought it up, they, maybe they'd put you out to pasture. And some of those ideas you take and you shape and you position, and they become, really, they go really far they turn into an LTO. So it's one of those things where I think that it's just always having your ears open, and just creating multiple pulse points, whether it's annual meetings, whatever it is or just even a suggestion box. Set up just a general marketing email that people can flip ideas to. You're better off saying no to 1,000 ideas than missing one that could pay off immensely for the brand. So that's always how we've looked at it.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fantastic.
And
when we think about, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Crystal.
no, it's okay. And I was thinking too, you're also talking about, Josh, you mentioned how do you disseminate an idea maybe from the top level down into the franchisees. And I think one of the really important tools that every franchisor or has that maybe isn't leveraged enough is the macro understanding of what works and what doesn't. And being able to uncover opportunities across the board, not just marketing, but even operations, finance, accounting, all of those things, being able to uncover gems of what's working in a region, in a market, what great ideas might be driving performance differently, and how do you scale that then across all your locations. So the macro understanding shouldn't be underestimated, and you use that data to then disseminate down why something is important and why we think it will work. Genevieve's got this council. You test it amongst your small group of locations. There's always franchisees that are hungry to test new ideas, that are hungry to, what more can I do? How can I grow my business? Those are the folks that you bring to the table and say, we've got this idea. We think it'll work because of X, Y, and Z. Can you guys be our guinea pigs? And let's roll this out to market and understand what makes it work. And then you disseminate that down. But data at the macro level is incredibly important to fuel a lot of decision making that happens both at the national level, but also at the individual franchise location level.
And to Crystal's point, exactly, right? So we represent Flynn Group, which is the world's largest franchise operator. They have just one of their brands is Applebee's, for instance. So we support more than 460 of their Applebee's locations. If everybody's heard of the Dollarita, right? That was all the craze a few years ago. The Dollarita started as a test with a franchise operator in Texas. And that drink, it felt like they couldn't keep it in stock. So they took all those metrics, to Crystal's point, and they kicked them up the ladder. And corporate really ran it through and analyzed it and decided, all right, let's roll this out system wide. And it was a gigantic hit for the brand in a time where the brand, like everybody needs a hit every now and again. So being able to absolutely to identify some groups who can test either some marketing campaigns or some LTOs or who are just willing to roll up their sleeves and maybe put in a little extra work to do it, it can pay off huge dividends for the brand system wide, not just at a local level.
Yeah, I would encourage franchisors to practice repeating, I'd be happy to let you pilot that, right? So it's like you're not committing to the idea that this is something you're rolling out. But I mean, so many of our best ideas have come from franchisees. They're not necessarily things we thought of and then said, oh, well, let's find a location to test it out, or let's take this FAC. They've come to us from owners. And as long as they're in keeping with the brand and we think there's a strategic reason to explore it, that's really been our approach, is we're happy to let you pilot this. But then to both Crystal and Brian's point about data, then we're like, but then you're going to be our case study and there will be partnership, because we want to know we want to follow about how this is going to work, see what doesn't work, and if it's worth the resources to roll it out to others. So I had to learn to practice that, because initially I maybe held things a little bit too tightly and didn't want anyone to try anything new because I was a little bit scared. And now I've really seen how it's impacted our growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you make great points on the kind of testing, learning, and then if this has real value to the broader system, let's roll it out. And I think it's, when we think about how fast AI continues to advance and impact everyone's business beyond marketing, in a lot of different ways, when we think about evolving younger consumers, and there's less brand affinity, and a lot of data and research that shows there's areas of convenience. There's a desire to be more values driven, more localized, right? Marketing is getting more and more localized, and customer behavior, because customer behavior is getting more localized. And so I think that the point you made around having some level of macro kind of consistency that bears fruit in terms of really good data sets and trends that can't always be brought to the surface on a micro level in an individual market with an individual owner is critical. We work in the world of digital in pretty much all regards. And so Genevieve, you mentioned earlier, you rolled out this new website. I'd love for you, each of you to give your perspectives on, whether it's things like the website or managing location data or top-down content strategy and how that can marry local content strategy. I think there's key tactics that we have some alignment, at least here among this group, on. This is what the franchisor, by leading and driving and empowering franchisees where available, can bring those macro insights to the forefront. That's going to be to the betterment of the entire system. So website may be one. I'm curious if there are others that come to mind, not just from a marketing perspective, but data technology, as you alluded to as well, Crystal.
Yeah. Go ahead,
No,
Genevieve.
go ahead, Crystal. No, you go.
Yeah, I think some of these things are fairly clear cut, and there's little debate in the franchise world about what a franchisor would be responsible for. So the website and how that trickles down into the local websites for franchise owners. Their business listings are typically holistically managed at a franchisor level, with the ability for the franchisee to do things like add their own photos to their listing, respond to their own reviews, that sort of thing. But it's centralized data management with franchisees having the ability to customize it in their market. SEO is typically something that's handled kind of at the national level, but there is a growing movement toward local SEO and how franchisees can get more out of organic. PR is obviously something that I think is also shared. You have a corporate strategy, but then you have local playbooks, and Brian can get into that. I think one of the areas of the biggest debate in franchising is actually on the paid side. And what do we do with paid advertising? Most of the time there is a contribution on the local side for franchisees to invest their own money. And then there is also a contribution to a brand fund. Or a marketing fund of some sort. And that brand fund and marketing fund is probably where the most debate happens. And there's umpteen different schools of thought around the best use of that money, and especially how is money spent at the national level to really benefit the brand. I think a lot of times the approach is the national fund is there to build brand exposure and brand affinity for all markets across in which you operate. And then the investment on the local side by a franchise owner is to drive customers in the door. And I think that's a really important distinction. And the two should complement each other tremendously. And in theory, it's complementing each other because the franchise owner has customers walking through the door or the phone ringing from their campaigns. On the national side, I see a lot of folks who measure brand awareness, or they may measure, likelihood to purchase or to become a customer, those types of insights that can actually be fairly costly to get out of those studies. I think ultimately on the national side, the goal should be, are you making it more effective for franchisees to get customers? Is their cost for customer acquisition actually lowering because of what you're doing on the brand side? If that marketing is driving down cost and making it more efficient for the franchisees to run their business, then I think that marketing is being very effective. Again, there's a lot of different schools of thought, and I could probably do a whole nother webinar about this one topic specifically. So I'll stop there.
I love it. Genevieve, Brian, I'm curious to your thoughts.
I loved everything Crystal said. I would just I think you mentioned our website, and that was an interesting exercise for us in sort of thinking through all of this. So in terms of, at almost every level. So it was even just the architecture of the website, where we really obviously wanted to be able to control as much of we needed to be able to control the brand consistency and the way we were going to be represented. But we also wanted to give the franchisees places where they felt like they could make their location specific website their own, and that it would truly reflect their business. And then we also were really intentional about ways in which we felt and have data behind that impacting our organic search, right? And impacting SEO, giving them places where, we'll have system-wide blog posts that get pushed out, but then they can put local blog posts up, highlighting the staff at their specific location. But then if you're going to do that, you also need to have guidelines around what those photos are going to look like, and make sure that you're setting up from a design perspective so that someone's not just uploading a horrible grainy photo that, takes down this carefully curated, beautiful look you've worked on your website. So it's like every single, even down to those little details where it was really meaningful for them to be able to not just have sort of a placeholder tab, but to really have a site that reflected their specific location and their business. Then we still needed to think through all of those details. I think sort of the non-negotiables are things around, data and data security. So really thinking through not just from a strategy perspective for digital marketing, but also, what's going to protect the integrity of the site and its performance. You can't have a setup and an infrastructure where you're going to have, just let franchisees put whatever pixels they want on the site and really drag down the performance of the site. And also to let, sort of whatever contractor they decide to work with for social media have access to all of your data. So things like that really you have to make sure are held at a franchisor level, and that you have clear guidelines around. This was a really important opportunity for us to set up a lot of protocol around that. But then it also did trickle down to the branding elements too, and at every single page of this new website.
Yeah, and as Crystal mentioned earlier, I mean, from a PR standpoint, the difference, in our experience, franchisors should really own the high level brand strategy. So the national campaigns, the messaging, the brand messaging, all that. But again, as we mentioned earlier, empowering franchisees with certain tools and rollout guides and best practices for effective local execution. As I mentioned earlier, so for us, it really depends on who we're representing, whether it's the franchisor or whether it's multi-unit franchisees. But for example, as I mentioned, those 460 Applebee's locations we support, during key national campaigns, Applebee's corporate announces a lot of those things, and they roll those promotions out in the national media landscape. And they sort of just hang there when they hit, right? Our job then is, as we're working with the multi-unit franchisee, is that our job is really to take those campaigns, like the way the media landscape works now is the news hangs out there at the national, but then the messaging doesn't trickle down to the local market the way that it used to, just because it changes in the landscape and there's so much noise in the world. But our job is really in parallel path to secure media coverage with local and regional market media within the footprint of the locations, right? That localized media coverage is really what helps drives the guests through the doors and their wallets, of course. And most importantly, it's a really, it's a solid 1-2 punch, and it works really well. But where we can, we also try and drive media really hard to push link backs, and that's for the benefit of organic SEO search, and rank and all that. So while it's really for us to create buzz in the market through earned media and paid media in some situations, wherever we can benefit the SEO side of it, which isn't even necessarily our charge. It's just trying to be a good partner to make sure that we're coming up when consumers are searching for it. So that's sort of like how we approach it. And that's how we see the difference between, corporate should put out sort of the national things that are nationally relevant. And then franchise or multi-unit franchise owners should be the ones really engaging at that local level. And, whether that is, a lot of systems have that 2% hyper-local marketing budget requirement. That just seems like a normal division of PR from our standpoint. And again, it's a 1-2 punch that works pretty well.
Mm-hmm. One last question. I want to kick it to some questions sorry, Crystal, go ahead.
No, go for it. I was going to say, we've got a really good question in the chat, so let's save time for Mark's question too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we're touching on some of these elements, and there's a really good question from the franchise owner perspective. Before we get to that question, I think a relevant piece that you all have alluded to is there are things, whether particularly around data ownership, customer privacy, things that just have to be in place at the franchisor level. As Crystal said, I think there's very little debate on that. I think what we find is that depending on the system, the category, there's when we talk about feedback loops or education back to franchise owners around the why and the benefit, ultimately, not just to them, but the entire system of having those structural elements in place can be lacking sometimes, which leads to franchise owner frustration. And so when you launch a new website, when you bring on a new tool or a technology to either execute marketing, improve operational processes, get your arms around customer data and rapidly advancing customer trends, how do you or do you think folks listening can get better at going about having those feedback loops, providing that education back to the owners around the why that goes beyond, I think, the surface level, this is what's best for the brand? I think that's a relevant piece, but I think the benefit to the business owners is also a conversation that it seems like there's some common ground that can be found when advancing these initiatives. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Thoughts, feedback? I feel like it's not an easy, it's a challenge, right? It's not an easy question to solve for.
I think for us, not to be a broken record, but we go back to education. And one thing that we found, there was a question that I don't think it went to everyone. I think it just went to us from Alexandra about how do you build protocols without it being overwhelming for a new franchisee? Does franchisee buy-in ultimately start with having enough support from the beginning, and for what must feel like a hike for them, which is such a good question. And the thing that I was thinking of about that I think ties into sort of how we're addressing your question, Josh, is so beyond, I keep saying education, right? And that could just look like a million webinars. But one of the things we've tried to be intentional about rolling out, especially for new franchisees, like Alexandra's speaking to, is cohorts. Putting them into groups where they're going to have support from peers. I think that so many great ideas come out of that, but also, it has a lot of knock-on effects, right? It's great for culture. It builds up bonds within the system. But it also helps us, we're still a pretty lean team, scale our resources. So anytime we're rolling out something new, anytime we really, to your point, really want people to understand the why, instead of just saying, here's what it is, we're looking for opportunities to have, working groups so that there can be deeper dives and we can explain. And then it's not just, here's what you should do, but here's why. Hopefully then they understand it on a deeper level. They're going to be able to run with it and take it further. So I think to Alexander, to the rest of your question, I actually find that those new franchisees, I think I mentioned earlier, really are the ones often asking for the protocols. I think it actually feels less overwhelming for them when we have those built out. It's more about how we communicate it to them, because there is so much that's overwhelming about being a new franchisee. And these cohorts are one of the ways that we've found are the most helpful and the least overwhelming, because they can be learning at the same time as their peers, and we can use it as a real education opportunity. And then it's something we use at all stages of franchisee development too. So it's not just for new franchisees, but again, it's been something that's been really scalable for us and has had a big impact.
That's fantastic. I love it. Well, great feedback. I do want to get to a question from the franchise owner perspective. So Mark in the chat, and I will paraphrase a little bit here, is part of a franchisor, unnamed, that in his words is really focused on kind of that national presence, right? And developing that top-down strategy and tactics that go with it. In essence, the big focus being maintaining consistency and brand integrity. The frustration that comes from Mark's perspective is it's limiting, in his mind, the ability to do more on a local level. And so I know we've talked a lot about structure and having some things in place. What are some examples? Genevieve, you mentioned piloting programs or having these cohorts, or Brian, what you've seen at the local level, even Crystal, we see with some of our partners, of really good ideas that have come from the local level that franchisees have the scope to kind of run with as a starting point, versus feeling like everything is entirely top down. Mark, I hope I got that relatively right, but it's a well put question.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. It's almost like they are limiting your ability to market so significantly, but probably also requiring you to have a minimum local spend in your FDD. So those things are a little contradictory. I will say, I think in the best franchise systems, you have a strategy set at the national side that includes objectives, and those objectives are based on what do we want our customers to do when they engage with us. they have established things like content calendars, promotional calendars, things like that are set at the national level that can be leveraged at the local level. And those are hopefully backed by data of things that have worked well in the past and can translate easily. I think it is, Genevieve's mentioned a lot of things like tools and tips. Genevieve also uses vendors who execute things at the local level on behalf of the franchisees, or give the franchisees some sort of self-serve opportunity to go off and do it on their own. That's when the playbooks, the guidebooks, the templates, and the tools come into play. I don't know all of the story behind this, but as a franchise owner, I think I would approach my field marketing team or even my corporate marketing team, depending on what structure you have, and say, I'm wanting to build out this marketing strategy because I believe that it's necessary in order for me to grow my business. Right now, I'm only allowed to do these things, and I've hit a wall, or I've tapped out. I don't see what additional opportunity is here. And I think we also need to recognize that a lot of franchisees come in without marketing experience. They're usually heavy in operations or something like that. And so they need support and help. And it should be up to the franchisor to give them the tools and support to make that happen. So I know you asked for some advice. I think my advice would be to raise my hand and say, have you looked at what other franchise systems are doing? I'm talking to other franchisees in my area, and they have all of these programs set up. A lot of franchisors have on your behalf programs where they will execute email marketing on your behalf. They will execute local media on your behalf, or they will allow you to run it on their own using their platforms, their MailChimp, or whatever they might have in place. And just raise your hand and say, have you looked at this? Can we pilot some of these things? I would be happy to take the lead in doing some of this legwork and figuring out how I can get more customers in my door or on my app or whatever that might look like.
Yeah, as a recovering micromanaging franchisor myself, I think one interesting way that you could ask this question, Mark, because it does sound so frustrating. And I'm really in agreement with you that I think we see the best social media and online presence in general is this real marriage between, we want the brand consistency of the content we provide to franchisees, and then we want that studio and location specific content. So I'm fully in agreement. I think you need that ability and an ability to do location specific marketing on every level. I would almost, thinking about from a franchisor's perspective, I wonder if you could ask them what guidelines would need to be in place for them to feel comfortable with you having more freedom to do that. Like what sort of tools, frameworks could be put in place so that they would feel really confident that that brand consistency was going to be out there because you really believe in. And to Crystal's point, I think exactly what she said, like point to some other examples that you've seen, you think this could, really help grow everyone's business exponentially. What would they need to have in place to feel really great about you being able to have more freedom for location specific content and marketing?
Yeah,
I love that.
I love it. And I think I would add just very quickly, I know we have 2 minutes, is we could probably spend another hour on measurement of success, right? So what does success looks like? What does that look like on the local level? And how does that translate up that the franchisor, such as yourself, Genevieve, would say, this is a really great program. It produced significant results. How do we scale this further? And then conversely, how franchisors in ownership of customer data, there was a question on that in the chat as well. Who should own that data? I think there's a firm belief that should be the franchisor with access to franchisees for transparency. There's a lot of benefit of having that in a cohesive environment, but sharing those metrics for success and how we measure success are critical. That comes with that collaboration and communication. Maybe that will be for another webinar at another time. I do know we're at time and want to be respectful of everyone's schedule. So Genevieve, Crystal, Ryan, thank you so much. Thank you to the IFA. This was a fantastic discussion. We could spend the rest of the afternoon here, but I know we're at time. So feel free to find us online, find us on LinkedIn. We'll send the matrix that kind of defines roles and responsibilities as a follow-up from the IFA as well. Reach out to us. We'd love the conversation, and Would love to answer any questions you have.
Perfect.
Thanks so much.
Thank you guys. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and another great weekend coming up very shortly. But thank you all so much for joining us. This was some great information, and thank you again to Location3 for sponsoring. And as I mentioned earlier, the recording will be emailed out in a couple hours. But yeah, thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.